Qui-Gon Jinn was a human male, revered amongst the Jedi Order, yet a maverick and unconventional, often butting heads with the Jedi High Council. Although he was regarded by many Jedi as sharp-witted and possessing great wisdom, he was Padawan to the Swordmaster Count Dooku, and mentor and friend to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Jinn also participated in many conflicts such as the Stark Hyperspace War, actions against Nebula Front, and the Naboo invasion. During the latter, Jinn met Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine and was largely responsible for his future Jedi training, making Kenobi swear to train the boy. Even after his death at the hands of Darth Maul, he played a vital role in the legacy of the Jedi Order. Due to Jinn being deeply in tuned to the living Force, he was able to transcend the physical plane and become a Force spirit.
Finding him was the will of the Force. I have no doubt of that.
Kit Fisto was a renowned Jedi Master in the waning years of the Galactic Republic. Being one of the survivors of the Battle of Geonosis, Fisto served as a Jedi General in the Grand Army of the Republic, as well as being a member of the Jedi High Council during the Clone Wars. In this time he led an assault team during the Battle of Mon Calamari. Fisto also lost his former Padawan to General Grievous, shortly after nearly defeating the Jedi Killer. Upon Anakin Skywalker's revelation that Palpatine was in fact Darth Sidious, Fisto, along with Mace Windu and two other Jedi Masters, attempted to arrest the Supreme Chancellor, but failed in that final conflict with the scheming Sith Lord. Fisto perished at the hands of Darth Sidious.
Master Fisto, in these matters, trust your insight we do.
Hello YouTube, Dead Diligent here, and today I'm doing Kit Fisto vs Qui-Gon Jinn. Qui-Gon Jinn was one of the finest swordsmen in the Jedi Order, having frequently sparred with many of his skilled contemporaries, notably his mentor, Dooku. Jinn was a master of the fourth form of lightsaber combat, Ataru. In combat, his blade work was wide and powerful, marked by heavy two-handed slashes and sudden flourishes to cover his flanks. Jinn's mastery of Ataru was such that he could easily defend from blaster-wielding opponents despite the form's weakness to blaster fire, though a skilled marksman could penetrate his guard. Rather than engaging in the energetic acrobatics typical of most Ataru specialists, Jinn, at least in the later years, tended to stay grounded during his lightsaber duels. That being said, he remained fully capable of utilising acrobatic attacks and manoeuvres during combat. Jinn was also capable of effectively employing unarmed combat strikes into his lightsaber sequences, like punches and kicks, in keeping with the Ataru style. However, Jinn was not without his weaknesses. Dooku had sparred with him plenty of times and knew every single flaw in the Ataru style. In his elder years, Jinn's strength and physical ability began to diminish from age, and his primary edge was diverged from his experience and intuition rather than his physical attributes. His flanking stamina became a particular notable issue due to the practice of Ataru, an incredibly tiring combat form even under ideal circumstances. However, Jinn was able to keep up with the much younger Darth Maul and Obi-Wan Kenobi for a long lightsaber combat. Despite his mastery of Ataru, Jinn was still prey to some of the form's flaws, namely weak defense and lack of effectiveness in confined spaces. As a side note, at one point during his training, Jinn once tried to use a whip, only to find that it tangled easily. Nevertheless, he had gained some knowledge of how to combat opponents armed with light whips, viro whips, and other whip-like weapons. Not that this will come into play in this matchup. During combat, Jinn preferred to adjust his technique based on the needs of the moment, rather than focus on an overall strategy, which sometimes left him over his head and almost getting him killed.
Do not defy the Council, Master, not again.
I shall do what I must, Obi-Wan.
A master practitioner of Shi-Cho, Kit Fisto was considered one of the best swordsmen in the Jedi Order. His mastery of the form was advanced, and he applied it in many battles and duels, always with his trademark smile. He went head to head with many of the most dangerous adversaries of the Clone Wars and survived. A notable opponent was General Grievous, whom Kit Fisto nearly defeated. As Form 1 specialises against multiple opponents, or in this case multiple weapons, he was well suited holding off General Grievous's 4 lightsabers. Fisto's quick thinking and speedy reflexes enable him to recognise vulnerable body points and body zones, typical of Form 1, and react immediately, as shown when cutting off Grievous's legs, and later one of his hands, during their duels. He was also competent in the Form 4 lightsaber combat, Ataru. His versatility and weapon skill was such that he could ably apply it towards the uses of dual blades or light whips. However, Kit Fisto was not without his weaknesses. Form 1 was ideal when heavily outnumbered and effective against many opponents, but a single opponent was able to find flaw in it, and this was proven in Kit Fisto's duel against Asar's ventress. He simply wasn't quick enough with his blade to deal with the Mikoshi specialism, and Shi-Cho was considered weak against Form 2 in any case. His final duel against Darth Sidious ended with Fisto's death, as despite Fisto's own power and skill, he simply wasn't a match for Darth Sidious. However, Fisto managed to last longer than his 2 combatants, being able to block several of Sidious's vicious blows before falling. It is worth noting that Fisto skirted as close to the dark side as Mace Windu. I found when comparing their lightsaber skills that Kit Fisto had a wider basis than Jinn. However, due to Fisto's specialism in Form 1, he leaves himself open in single combat. Although Fisto is adept in dual blades and light whips, showing a wider knowledge of dueling in general, this does not really come into play in this matchup. Unfortunately, Kit Fisto is geared for multiple opponents or multiple weapons, somewhere where you can just break loose and let go. Unfortunately, it's a bit different in single combat. Qui-Gon Jinn gets the edge as a lightsaber duelist.
Those who have power should restrain themselves from using it.
A philosophical warrior, Qui-Gon Jinn believed heavily in what he referred to as the living force, a method of focusing on the moment. Jinn had considerable skill with telekinesis, lifting people or objects, dislodging enemies with a single force push, throwing objects into the desired targets and dismantling droids. However, Jinn is never seen using this in his lightsaber sequences, rather putting his lightsaber away and focusing on the force power as a separate entity. During one of Jinn's missions, he was able to use a lightsaber throw to dislodge a droid attached to a turbo lift shaft. He has also used and applied a meditation trance known as Serenity, granted him renewed strength and focus as seen during the momentary break in his final duel with Darth Maul. Jinn was exceptionally skilled in mind tricks, as was evident when he managed to convince Boss Nass to lend him, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jar Jar Binks a transport on their way to Theed. An extraordinary account of his using the power was when he had to persuade a Hutt guard working on Offworld to give him access to Xanatos' private office. A truly remarkable feat, as Hutts as a species possess a level of natural resilience Force suggestion that borders on immunity. However, Toydarians seemed out of his reach. He was able to receive Force vision despite his preference to focus on the present rather than the future. In addition, he had some knowledge in Force healing. Qui-Gon Jinn was also able to enhance his physical capabilities with the power of the Force, notably his strength, but also his speed and acrobatics, typical of the superhuman feats of the Jedi. One of Jinn's lesser known Force powers was animal friendship. On the unknown blue planet, he controlled the mind of a beast and rode on its back for as long as he needed until he reached his destination. And probably his most notable feat in the Force was being able to transcend the physical plane and become a Force spirit.
You've been a good apprentice, Obi-Wan. And you're a much wiser man than I am. I foresee you will become a great Jedi Knight.
Having been trained as a Jedi consulate, Master Fisto was adept in the use of the Force. For instance, he was capable of creating and manipulating water currents through the use of both offensive and defensive purposes. Fisto developing his own Force technique from this ability, named the Force Water Orb, which was used during the Battle of Mon Calamari. This will not be taken into account in this matchup, considering that both combatants will be in a neutral battleground. He is the only known practitioner of this power, having created it himself though. He also possessed an acute sense, allowing him to read the emotions of other sentients. Fisto was also skilled in Force speed. His notable speed baffled Obi-Wan Kenobi's experienced gaze. Fisto was also an extremely skilled swimmer, and honed his Jedi abilities to take advantage of his amphibious organs, making him a lethal foe underwater as well as on land. Fisto is also known for having enhanced speed, strength and agility, common with Force wielders using the Force to augment their physical abilities. When comparing Qui-Gon Jinn and Ket Fisto's Force abilities, I've come to the conclusion that they seem quite even. Although Ket Fisto seems to have a wider range of Force abilities, they don't seem to be applicable in combat, and Jinn's ability to transcend the physical plane and become a Force spirit doesn't really come to play in combat. And since both combatants reluctantly use the Force during combat or downright stop before using it, giving the other an opening, I don't think either combatant would rely too heavily on their Force abilities, apart from their obvious Force augmentation of their speed and strength. I declare both combatants to be evenly matched in their application of the Force during combat.
You might have been a proud warrior once, but now you're just a pawn in Dooku's game.
Qui-Gon Jinn was well past his physical prime during the Naboo invasion. This being said, he was able to keep up a long duel with Darth Maul. However, in their first engagement on Tatooine, Jinn was exhausted after their very short encounter, looking out of breath and laying down on the floor. All of Jinn's positive physical attributes come mainly from his Force enhancement. Fisto, on the other hand, seems to be in great physical condition, not to mention his low light visibility and acute senses given to members of his race, being able to sense other sentient emotions and possibly anticipating their actions. Both combatants are trained in hand-to-hand combat, Jinn using more than Fisto though. When analysing their physical abilities, it's an easy one. Fisto gets the edge for physical abilities.
That cannot be. Dead you are.
During combat, Jinn preferred to adjust his technique based on the needs of the moment rather than focusing on overall strategy, which sums up Jinn's fighting style. He is no means someone who charges in and asks questions later, but he relies on his instincts and feelings to win the battle, which in most cases, that's enough. However, in his duel with Maul, he knew he was being guided to a place of Maul's choosing, but confident him and Obi-Wan could stop him. Fisto completely gave in to the moment, not thinking of an overarching plan, just going with the flow. As both of these Jedi styles match their personality, Jinn, a believer in the moment, and Fisto just going with the flow, they leave themselves vulnerable to other combatants who do have a plan or a more tactical insight. However, I give Jinn the slight edge for his tactical mind, if only barely. Jinn's lightsaber was set to green focusing crystals and had multiple small power cells and a highly embroidered design. However, it was nothing special and had nothing that was any different from the norm for a Jedi's weapon. Fisto, on the other hand, had a green lightsaber as well, with green focusing crystals. The only difference being that he modified his lightsaber to work underwater, which makes his lightsaber slightly more useful than Qui-Gon Jinn's, but in this combat it doesn't really make a difference. I declare Qui-Gon Jinn and Fisto equal in their armament. Now for that all-important verdict, the victor. I declare Qui-Gon Jinn the victor against Fisto. However, this is a marginal victory and both combatants would be extremely exhausted, if not extremely injured. Fisto and Qui-Gon seem to have very similar skills in all the areas that I looked at. Their application of the Force is very unique to them. Their combat skills are very focused and very focused on specifics that they want. And Fisto isn't really geared for one-to-one combat. Not saying he can't do one-to-one combat, as he has proven he can, but when matched against someone that is equal, if not better than him, he crumbles. With all that said, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed my versus video of Qui-Gon Jinn vs Fisto. Do you agree with me? Do you think I underestimated Fisto? Or do you think I overestimated Qui-Gon Jinn? Let me know in the comments below. Remember, this is all my opinion, so just let me know in the comments below what you think. And if you want to see any other versus videos, or who you would like to see, let me know in the comments below. Until next time, this has been Dead Diligent.